Welcome everyone to this very first edition of a series that has been titled, What are the root causes of migration from Central America? As I am sure you would agree with me, the fact that there continues to be many people trying to get to the United States of America without necessarily having visas to do so continues to be very much a headline of the news in the US and of course in the countries of origin. That is precisely why Alianza Americas has partnered with a number of organizations, which I will mention in a minute, to put together this series of events because we believe that the fact that the Biden administration has announced its desire to take a different approach on migration by focusing on precisely the factors that originate these migratory movements, this forced migration pattern, is indeed a breath of fresh air. However, we want to make sure that it does not become a breath of fresh air just in the outer ways of understanding this, in the more superficial ways of understanding this, but rather that it really becomes an exercise to take a deep dive into really understanding the economic, social, political, cultural factors that indeed originate, among other things, the fact that there are still large numbers of people fleeing these countries and seeking a better life, better opportunities abroad, but particularly in the United States of America. As I mentioned before, this activity is possible because of the very important partnership that Alianza Americas has been able to do in conjunction with Casa Yurumein, one of the symbolic Afro-Central American organizations in the Bronx in New York, the Central American Black Organization, or ONECA, the Central America Resource Center in Washington, D.C., the Central America Resource Center in San Francisco, and Hondurans Against AIDS, which is another organization that is co-sponsoring this event. I should mention that every one of the groups I just mentioned are member organizations of Alianza Americas that distinguish themselves for their dedication to a transnational advocacy work. In addition, we are lucky to also have partnered with several key organizations, including the Latin American Working Group, the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, OXFAM America, and Presente.org. Again, keep in mind, this is the first event of a series that we are going to be sponsoring over the next few weeks. I want to make sure that you know that this first session is also going to be soon available through Alianza America's YouTube channel and is being broadcasted live via Facebook this morning. I want to introduce the three people that are going to be our guest speakers today. They are all leaders in their respective countries on matters relevant to the issue at hand today. Today's edition of this series entitled, What are the root causes of migration from Central America, is focused on democratic governance and the rule of law. And therefore, we are very fortunate to have with us Natalia Ortiz from Guatemala. Natalia graduated in sociology from the School of Political Science at the University of San Carlos in Guatemala. She has done specialized studies in migration, governance, and development. She has experience in qualitative research on migration, human rights, gender and violence, childhood and adolescence, governance, public management, transparency, and legislative processes. She's currently a staff member at the Central America Institute for Social Studies and Development, INCEDES, and she previously worked with Guatecambia Association and the Inter-American Dialogue. So thank you very much, Natalia, for being with us. The second speaker is Marco Navarrete. Marco has studies in psychology, Latin American history, and political science. He has worked in human rights organizations, international agencies, and academic institutions. He currently works at the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, Foundation of Germany, in the Office for Central America, where he specializes in political analysis, human rights, and the structural challenges to development from a cooperative approach with local organizations and institutions in the region. Thank you very much for being with us this morning, Marco. And the third panelist is Joaquín Mejía. Joaquín is somebody who holds a doctoral degree in advanced studies in human rights from the Carlos III University of Madrid. He is a researcher for the Reflexión Research and Communications team of the Society of Jesus in Honduras, known better as ERIC. And he's also the deputy coordinator for their human rights legal team. Thank you very much, Joaquín, for also being with us. I want to highlight the fact that Alianza Americas decided to prioritize voices from the region, because very often decisions are made about that very region involving these three countries, but hardly ever we take into account the point of view of people from those regions. So that's why I am very happy to have Natalia, Marco, and Joaquín with us to answer some questions that we will be asking from them. And let me just say that this format is going to be rather fluid. I will not ask questions specifically to any one of them, but rather pose questions that every one of them would be able to actually answer. So let me begin by posing the first question. And again, feel free to jump at your leisure. Do not feel that I have to call on you to be able to open your mic and actually make a contribution. The first question I have is this. In your opinion, what are the most relevant historical facts that have to be understood about the challenges faced by your respective countries in terms of democratic governance? So please, any one of you, feel free to go forward. Don't make me call on you, please. Joaquín?
Okay, I will start.
Go ahead.
Well, I think it's very important about Honduras to say that it's not possible to understand the recent history of our country without remarking that it has had close ties with the United States for decades. And I would like to focus on three historic moments after the return to formal democracy that have determined the failure of the democratic governance and the promotion and protection for human rights. The first one, during the 80s, the US supported the Honduran army in order to implement the national security doctrine, with which imposed a widespread climate of terror and caused the disappearance and death of hundreds of people and forced displacements of thousands. And in second place, in 2009, even though the US had a public discourse against the coup d'etat, in practice promoted a dialogue through the Organization of American States between the coup perpetrators and the post government, which finally whitened the facto government, who later organized elections that were not free and fair. And then, in the third point, in 2017, the US supported and validated an illegal presidential re-election of Juan Orlando Hernandez and an electoral fraud, and promoted a dialogue through the United Nations in order to give legitimacy to the unconstitutional government of Juan Orlando Hernandez. What Honduras got from these three historical events? One, institutional and democratic deterioration. Two, lack of legitimacy. For example, more than or almost the 83% of population believes that prosecutors and judges protect corrupt and powerful people in Honduras. Three, a wide range of illegalities committed by Honduras security forces acting in their official capacities or on behalf of private interests or criminal organizations. And four, persistent human rights violations and widespread impunity. And five, political instability and significant outflows of migrants and asylum seekers. And two important data that help us to understand what I just said. Normally, 9,000 people flee Honduras every month. And in 2019, Honduras was the fourth country in the world with the most asylum seekers.
Thank you, Joaquín. Natalia or Marco?
I'll go. Well, regarding your question, it's very important to point out something that also Joaquín said about the countries in the region. In the case of Guatemala, we're talking about a young democracy. The peace, after more than 30 years of conflict, internal conflict, the peace agreements were signed in 1996, 25 years ago. So we're talking about democracy with an institutional framework that at this point is still facing many gaps and inconsistencies that need to be addressed. Especially when we link this factor with the structural causes regarding migration, we see a systematic weakening of the democratic institutions in terms of their ability to respond to the needs of the population. And also, when we talk about recent historical situations, since the protests in 2015, there has been a constant context of distrust and lack of legitimacy of from the citizens to its institutions, and the different decisions and dispositions from the three branches of the government. Also, we can talk about a regression in cooptation of the state, the use of excessive force. There are many examples, but I would like to point it out the excessive use of force during the protests in November 2020, when many citizens were protesting against the executive decisions regarding the annual budget, as well as the role that the Guatemalan government played in the contention of the migrant caravans during last year. There's also a general perception about how the corruption, this endemic corruption, is deepening into the state and in institutions, and how it exacerbates the citizen trust and the perception of how dialogue and consensus spaces are being closed. And in contrast, how many strategic agendas regarding health, education, economic recovery in this pandemic are being led away from the real needs of the population. All of that related to this distrust of the population, of the citizens, to this decisions of the government. It is also reflected on the lack of transparency and how the state resources are being used, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, in terms of the social programs, the attention and the importance of the public health system, and more recently, the access of the vaccine. Additionally, recent situation regarding the judicial system and the importance of the election of judges and magistrates out of Supreme Court and the Constitutional Court are being led through very opaque processes. Right now, in this moment, the Congress is leading the process of election of the magistrates of the Supreme Court under heavily guarded presence of the police and in a very closed space, which reflects how the different branches of the government are acting are directing their agenda and actions towards the perpetration of corruption practices and impunity. And this has an impact and demonstrates the conditions of vulnerability that many populations face today in the country. And this and all of these, when we added up all of these structural causes, we see that again, migration constitutes a strategy for many of these families who didn't have access to the social programs that the government provided during last year, were not able to get access to job opportunities, to the public health system, to many of these population groups in vulnerability conditions seeks to see the decision of migrate as an only strategy, the main one to survive, not only them, but also to the survival of their families.
Thank you, Natalia. Marco, want to comment on this question too? And by the way, you are already going ahead of some of the questions that I will ask you, so we'll come back to them later on in the program. By the way, I also want to take advantage, before you go on, Marco, to let people know that if they want to send questions via the Q&A function, for those of you who are connected via Zoom, please do so using the Q&A function within Zoom, and we will be collecting questions to ask the panelists as we move forward. But Marcos, please.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, and thanks to Alianza Americas and every single sponsor of this event. I think in El Salvador, we have a very similar context in comparison to Honduras and Guatemala. It's a region focus. It's not just a matter of El Salvador as a unique country that had to deal with several processes like the ones described by Eric and Natalia. I think the principal or most important transitions of El Salvador have been state repression in the 60s and 70s, and then the civil war in the 80s, and the peace accords and the democratic electoral stage since the 90s. I think this is very important to take into account because we are very close to move forward in the participation of people through more than votes in El Salvador, through an election, or going back to another repression of state. And that's very concerning to the advances, slow, but still advances of democracy in El Salvador. I think these historical stages or transitions, as I like to call it, have been part of our culture. And one of the most important reasons why we need to understand migration and forced displacement have been fueled by all this phenomenon, because every single one of them have been full of fake promises, or at least lack of justice, and so many examples and actions of impunity and inequality in the region. So El Salvador is just one example of how models, mostly economic models in the region, have been very important to explain why we are in this situation now. I think the most dominant powers in the world, not just the United States of America, but other regions in the world, have been important to impose these economic models, not just to appropriate the formal powers, the states or the governmental institutions, but to impose their economic benefit every single time they could. So I think as an example, weather change and every single aspect of the environmental impact that we have in the region through mining and other exploitation of resources it's a good explanation, a good expression of this economic model that have been important to our democratic situation so far.
Thank you very much to the three of you. I think it is fair to conclude from your respective answers that the region has experienced not only a backslide in terms of any semblance of democratic governance, but that we also have a lot of problems in terms of the economic policies and the economic system that remains in place. We will actually be addressing the questions of economic models and economic policies in a later edition as part of this series of events on the question of root causes. But let me actually piggyback on something that you all said. I mean, given the fact that you are all pointing to what I would characterize as a deterioration of democracy and the presence of other actors, and I want to specifically ask about this because, Central America and the three countries that you happen to live in are also countries affected by the presence of non-state actors that actually are able to control territory in each of the countries. This is actually even true in the case of Mexico, based on some very recent studies. But the question that I want to ask, which is a very important question, perhaps the most important question in this particular edition of this series, is what would be your recommendations for a potentially positive role by the United States of America, by the government of the United States of America in your countries, and recommendations that may also be extensive to other multilateral actors that are present in the region and that have relevance for the life of each of these countries. So any one of you who would like to go first, please do so.
Thank you. I'll take the lead this time. And I think it's very important that I think for international cooperation agencies and mostly countries with representation in El Salvador, and obviously for the same thing for Guatemala and Honduras, that they have at least three functions. The first one is the democratic auditing. What I'm trying to say in between marks is that every single process that is taking the new government and the political parties, institutional representations, and members of civil society in El Salvador have been part of a whole plan of protection of human rights and obviously the state of law. I think that will be very important, first of all, to improve democracy or at least to sustain democracy as the way that we have it right now with electoral representation. At least with that, we need to be careful that every single attempt from the foreign countries have been focused on the respect of democracy and the respect of the state of law. The second thing is a protection for civil society, mostly organized civil society that will be in opposition to some alternatives that the government will take place. I will say that this is very important to take into account in consideration to the experiences that we have had in the last 30 years in El Salvador. Every single new group in power in the government has been always related to a very single elite that is looking for their own benefit, mostly, and most of the times, for their economic benefit and not for the benefit of the whole population, or at least the majority of the population that is in vulnerability. So I will say that every single action from the United States government, and obviously every single country that wants to make cooperation in El Salvador, has to focus on the protection of every single attempt of making opposition to a very possible radical line of decisions from the new government. Why I'm saying that? Because they already have two of the three formal powers in the state. And the third thing, I think, is transparency. I think every single loan, every single aspect of the economic support that the United States of America taking financial support, like the $4 billion that are offering for the next 4 years in the northern triangle of Central America, this will be very important to make accountability as they never did. Transparency will be the first rule to prevent corruption in the new levels of government and the new decisions they will take place if they want to be as the old legacy of the last governments. If they want to be, if they want to improve these processes, they will need to show it. And that's where the international cooperation in countries like the United States of America will have a very important place to take.
Thank you, Marcos. Natalia or Joaquín? And let me add one other layer to this question, because I just read this morning a disturbing piece of news in the New York Times, where basically they are reporting that the Biden administration is already asking the Mexican government to please do everything they can to stop the flows. I mean, to stop more Central Americans from coming, which sadly would suggest that once again, the one most important criteria driving US foreign policy towards Central American countries, and Mexico, of course, would be to stop migratory flows. And sadly, I believe that that has been the focus of the US even before Donald Trump, going back to 2014. And in my view, the elevation of that issue to such an important place in foreign policy considerations has actually given a lot of room to governments in the region to actually like Donald Trump, to basically do the dirty work, so to speak, for the US, and pretty much leaving behind other considerations like those you were bringing up, Marco. Defend democratic governance, defend human rights, defend freedom of speech, transparency, and accountability. Didn't seem to matter that much, so long as governments align with the notion that they were going to do anything they could to stop migration flows. So let me again present the question. From your perspective, what would be a positive role by the new administration in the US, by the Biden administration, in as far as helping improve, democracy and improve rule of governance in countries like Honduras and Guatemala? So Joaquín or Natalia, who wants to go first?
I do it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I would like to say something that is very important to understand why the international community, the United States administrations, don't understand what's happening in Honduras, because since 2009, Honduras lives a situation of democratic abnormality. And donor countries and international organizations have not wanted to see this, and have insisted in applying measures that can be adequate in a situation of democratic normality, but not in the current situation, which is exceptional. That's why the failure, in my opinion, of the huge economic investment of the international community to try to strengthen democratic institutions in Honduras. And in first place, the United States administrations, the OEA, the UN have insisted in elections to overcome the political crisis in Honduras, but elections have deepened that crisis and increased the citizen distrust in democracy, because these elections have not been free and fair. And in second place, the judicial branch, the office of the prosecutor, the national police, the army now have, for example, new buildings, more personnel and with better salaries, and they have better equipment, but very few quality results. Like, for example, reduction of impunity, increasing of citizen confidence in democracy, or expansion of civic spaces. To the contrary, now the situation is worse. Actually, according to the Congressional Research Service, Honduras remains one of the most violent countries in the world and continues to suffer from persistent human rights abuses and impunity. That's why a very important sector of Honduran society believes that it's very important that international community consider to support the establishment of a provisional government made up of respectable citizens, which with a very close accompaniment of international community, convene a national dialogue on the basis of what we have called shared basic agreements in order to agree on minimum consensus to start rebuilding democracy and the rule of law. But the problem is that sometimes the international community doesn't want to see this, or they are, agreed with this situation.
Natalia.
Thank you, Oscar. Well, regarding the Biden administration, in recent weeks, with what is happening in the judicial system in the country, the State Department, as well as the U.S. Embassy and other actors from Washington, including some senators, and have made very clear statements regarding the importance to strengthening the judicial system through the election of judges and magistrates without any attachment or strings with these non-state actors, as a mechanism to promote good governance and access to justice. But there are also many structural factors related that would counter the contention approach regarding migration. But about what Joaquín and Marco said, that has been already mentioned, when it comes to not only the Biden administration, but international organizations, the international community, they have maintained, it is important that they keep maintaining a constant dialogue and monitoring for the fulfillment of international standards of human rights, including different frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals, the international, I forgot the word, the International Pact on Migration that was signed in 2018. And as well as the work that they are maintaining with civil society organizations, because at recent experiences of the mission, the work of the civil society, the international community has been an important actor to work with the civil society in not only in strengthening their agency capacity to work with different political and social actors, but also to promote an agenda with minimal consensus in which, as Joaquín said, and it's an important priority for the country, the importance to promote transparent processes, because when a government is more transparent and open to its citizens and other actors, civil society and citizens in general have more opportunities to participate in accountability processes, not only on a vertical point of view, but also working along with control mechanisms that are at the inside of the state, which is a different an horizontal form of accountability. That also well, when it comes not when we talk about the international organizations and international community, actors such as the United States, the Organization of American States, as well as the ASICA, are actors that have promoted the strengthening of promoting the importance of governance and the strengthening of the institutions through the promotion of dialogue and collaborative work processes based on the context, on the particular context and needs of each country, but also in the main points that and circumstances that the countries in the region shared. So I think that if we keep this contention approach without addressing this lack of transparency, the impact of corruption, how the role of the civil society organizations and other social actors is being diminished by the dispositions of the state of the countries in the region, I think we will go to the same situation we have been dealing for recent years. We are not addressing the structural conditions that has an impact in states that are continuously debilitating itself without the means to provide for their citizens, and it would only exacerbate the conditions to migration and as migration, the weakening of the economic systems in the region, and instead of promoting governance, we will be talking about how the countries in the region are facing a more each day a situation of lack of legitimacy, respect for human rights, and accountability.
Thank you, Natalia. The third question I had, you already answered, and it's basically a question related to the relationship between a weakening democratic governance reality, a weakening of the rule of law, as potential factors that also lead to more people feeling that there is no hope for them in their own countries, and that therefore, the best option is to indeed flee, and try to make a new life, preferably in the US, as it is the country that most people understand as the place where perhaps offers, the best possibilities for better lives. So I won't go into that question. I do want to highlight the fact that you have provided several recommendations, and we will be obviously taking notes from these conversations that we are having, because one of the questions that somebody asked is if the US government is already reaching out to organizations like yours, in your own countries, as part of this exploration of answers to what are the root causes of migration. And I have to say that recently, Alianza Americas was invited to be part of a conversation with people from the State Department. And one of the recommendations we gave them was precisely to engage, in conversations with more people in the region to be able to better answer the question about what would be a good positive role by the US government given these circumstances. So let me just move to the last question so that we have some time also to look at some of the questions that have been posed in the Q&A. The question that I have, just to wrap up this formal part of questions and answers to you, the panelists, is the following. You have mentioned the need to work to strengthen democracy and strengthen the rule of law beyond matters of elections taking place. Because as Joaquín very well pointed out, you can have elections and still end up, with a very undemocratic system. You can have elections and still end up with governments that are not at all governments working for the betterment of the majority of the population, or who represent, the real common agreements that should exist within different actors in a given country. So I'd like you to be as specific if you can in pointing out what would be critical institutions that you would believe need to be strengthened if we are to have a chance of actually improving democratic governance, if we have a chance of improving the rule of law in each of your countries, and how specifically a government like the US, can help strengthen those very institutions that may be in critical need of support at this point in time. Who wants to begin? Natalia, perhaps?
Very well. Well, there are many institutions that played an important role in public management, promoting governance, and as transparency in fighting corruption has been a main issue of addressing during this conversation. I would like to point it out that one of the institutions we think in the case of Guatemala would be very important to address, to strengthen in regards of monitoring and the use of how the state is using the resources would be the Controller General of Accounts, or in Spanish it would be La Contraloría General de Cuentas. It is the institution that plays an important role in accountability, in horizontal accountability, because it monitors the use of resources for all the institutions on the executive branch. It is also important to talk about the institutional bodies that are related to the access to justice. And in this, there is a very important situation. It is that the General Attorney's Office, especially the what we call it FESI, la Fiscalía Especial contra la Impunidad. It is one of the offices of the General Attorney's Office that has played an important role during the past 6 years, not only in related to access to different investigations related to corruption cases, and has dismantled different criminal and non-state actor structures that has a negative impact on how on the development of the state, as well as the judicial system. There is additionally there is the role of the Constitutional Court and monitoring the compliance with the Constitution, and as well as the General Attorney's Office, especially FESI, has played an important role in putting a stop to different initiatives and actions from different branches of the government that were directed towards promoting impunity and perpetuating corruption. In terms of the respect and protection of human rights, there is many civil society organizations and other actors in the country are very concerned because during last year, the president displayed a series of dispositions regarding the closing up of different human rights instance one of them is the Presidential Commission on Human Rights and the Presidential Secretary for Women. These two institutions played an important role in monitoring the compliance of how in terms of public policy we are promoting gender equality, preventing violence against women, but also how as part of the country's foreign policy, the state is working with the United Nations as the Inter-American Court on Human Rights in attending the different concerns of the international community regarding the violation of human rights in the country. And lastly, I would like to talk about the role of the Congress. The Congress, the legislative branch of the government, not only has a role in monitoring and the actions of the different institutions of the executive branch, but it also have a role of legitimacy towards represent the interests and needs of the population of their different territories. So it is very, I'm talking about the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, but in this case, it's very important because it would be a window of opportunity about what you said, which is citizen engagement, regarding an articulated work toward actions, more focused actions on sustainable development, the strengthening of the stage of the institutions on different levels. We can talk maybe on a local, municipal, and regional level, but also in approaching needs regarding economic policy, reforms to the normative framework that would also help to to promote a governance agenda. And this is also part of what the Biden administration has been trying to promote toward the different messages about the importance that it would not only to address these issues, but also that these issues in these processes multiply to strengthen the root. How can we say it? The roots, the importance for the right for many population groups to grow and develop in their own origin countries. And this is the main point in all this is the strengthening and the collaborative work has been an important message that as civil society organizations, we have been trying to promote, to get in the public opinion towards again the promotion of an agenda with minimal consensus to keep working, even if it's small steps, but to keep working on that.
Great. Thank you, Natalia. Joaquín or Marco? You need to mute yourself.
Okay.
Joaquín, you want to go first?
Yeah, actually, I want to start by saying that Honduras has become an electoral autocracy according to the Congressional Research Service. In a narco state, as you can see in trials against Honduran narcos in a federal court of the South District of New York. I have said that because it's important to come back to my idea, my initial idea about the democratic abnormality and the need of the establishment of a transitional government that convene a national dialogue. And this transitional government can be easier in Honduras because it's a very small country and everybody knows who is who. And also, nobody can deny that the US government has a powerful incidence over the Honduran authorities. And this transitional government should, in my opinion, work on 4 urgent tasks. The first one, to call for free and fair elections with the accompaniment of the international community. 2, to start a deep process of demilitarization of the public life and a real and transparent process of cleanup of the security forces. 3, to take appropriate measures to guarantee the selection of high magistrates on the basis of merits, integrity, and capacity, and no further political links in order to ensure separation of power. And the United States has many things to say and to do about these things that I'm talking about. So if we want to guarantee the democratic rebuilding in Honduras so that people can live without, fearing misery and violence and don't want to flee, international community must understand that cannot continue dealing with Honduras as if it is a democratic country. Before an exceptional situation, it is needed exceptional measure. That's why I think that maybe I'm being too optimist, but I believe that our political crisis added to the departure of Trump represent an opportunity, and I would like to think that the new US administration will be more open to listen the voices inside and outside of the United States about the need to rebuild the democracy in Honduras and support the will of Honduras. The organization I work for did a survey on what the Honduran people dreams about, and the US doesn't appear in that dreams. People's dreams are in this order: to have a decent job, to have a house, that everyone to be able to study, to walk freely in the street. According to this survey, when we asked how people dream of their country, they answer a country without violence, a country with all people working, a country without corruption, a country without impunity, a country with education and health for all. And all these issues are very important, and are those issues that the United States is working on in Honduras through the cooperation, through US aid, and that's why I think that this is convenient not only for Honduran, but also for the United States in the context of immigration. But the problem here is if the new administration is going to understand finally if that Honduras that is necessary to deal with Honduras with this vision of that there is not a democratic country, and that is very necessary to implement exceptional measure to this situation of abnormality.
Marco. And I have to say that we are running out of time, but hopefully we can do it before we have to close this session. But go ahead, Marco.
Okay, thank you so much, Oscar. I will try to be to make a wrap up considering the question. I think at least in El Salvador, there are many institutions of transparency and dedicated to the financial control of the government, international cooperation agencies, think tanks, and representative sectors of the population that needs to be supported and strengthened in this new stage of the government. I think most of the governments in the history of El Salvador avoided dialogue, and participation. And both, they are roots of democracy. So it's impossible to have a real democracy without these conditions. If the new government decides by itself to do this, to avoid any single action of dialogue with the representations of society and the most vulnerable groups in El Salvador, it will replicate the structural causes of poverty, inequality, violence, and of course, migration. And talking about the US government, I think the US government and its institutions in the region like USAID and others, they need to change approach. They have been part of this mess in between marks in the region because they have been supporting organizations and institutions related to the governments in power, not just economically speaking, but allowing them to promote policies against human rights. So saying or not saying is the same in regions like El Salvador and Central America. The US government, they need to change focus. They need new partners, mostly those who have been proved in history that have been able to analyze the context with participation of vulnerable people and that gave alternatives again and again to support democracy strengthen. I think we are very small countries and the US government knows us. So every single action is at will. So this needs to be changed. And especially talking about every single aspect of Natalia and Joaquin have already mentioned that we are very close to a new era. It's not unknown to us, but we are very close to a new era of autocracy and authoritarianism that can be established in Central America without the right choices to take. So I would say that a phenomenon like migration and forced displacement will be just the tip of the iceberg. I think most of the problems that we already have, they can be increased if we don't change models of democracy, if we only allow the new powers to control the decisions and the policies that had failed in history in Central America.
Thank you very much, Marco. We are coming to pretty much the end. We ran out of time. It's almost an hour since we began this conversation. Let me just point out that several of the questions that were asked are specifically related to the economic arena. We will have a session as part of this series to actually look more carefully at the economic policies in place and how they constitute also root causes, for migration. So I would very much invite you to make sure to be part of that conversation. But there is one question that has come up that none of you specifically mentioned. A lot of attention was given some years past regarding commissions intended to study issues of corruption, issues of impunity. CICIG is what comes particularly to mind in the case of Guatemala. Honduras had something intended to be similar, but clearly wasn't. And El Salvador is actually talking about a commission now that is also very different than CICIG as far as I can tell. So the question I would like to ask is, what role do national or international or regional commissions along the lines of those that I already mentioned would actually help, in improving democratic governance, in improving rule of law, to the extent that the fact that they are deteriorating also become part of the root causes of migration. And I would really appreciate it if you can be very, very brief and succinct in the answers that you can give. So anyone who wants to begin, please go. Anyone? No one?
Well, yeah, I think at least talking about El Salvador, I think we are in a very new stage of transitions. I think most of the people have decided to take a single step to the invisible lines of democracy. So I think we are ready to support every single chance we have to change the old habits and the bad habits of corruption in El Salvador, just to mention one of the most important problems that we have. So I think every single step that the new government will take place will be an action that can be supported by social society, mostly organized in the country, saying if it's the right step to take or it's not. So I think we are a very limited scenario to lead these actions. But I think with the support of international organizations like Alianza Americas, like every single organization related to the country and the region, I think with the support of international cooperation, we will focus on the judgment of how democracy can be strengthened in El Salvador. I think it's a very unique scenario. I think there's no good answer to the gray areas of democracy that we've been living in the last 40 or 50 years. So this is a very new stage that we are ready to build, just taking into account every single time the rule of law and the civil rights protection.
Joaquín or Natalia, any final comments on the question of commissions studying corruption and impunity?
Well, I only want to say that I think we have to wait for the establishment of this regional commission against corruption, because it's need to see the mandate of this regional commission. But at least what I know is that this regional commission is not going to have the same power that MASIC or CICIG. And obviously this is a very important issue, because we don't know what is going to be the role of this regional commission, because I don't know if they are going to work together with the office of the prosecutor, who in the case of Honduras, for example, is being denounced because of his links to narco traffic, for example. So I think we have to wait to see the mandate and the structure that this commission is going to have.
Natalia, very quickly.
Thank you. I agree with Joaquin. I think we will have to wait, because in the case of Guatemala, the very institutional framework of the state can be an obstacle for these regional bodies. After the experiences at CICIG in Guatemala, there has been different efforts to shield the institutionality, to prevent new actions and situations that would lead to the construction of regional, in this case of a regional body, as the proposal from the Biden administration. So we definitely will have to wait and see, but this very dark scenario, I think that silver lining is the work of the special prosecutor against impunity is doing or has been doing, and it would be a very strong actor in this kind of alliances.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, not only for these last answers, but for having spent this past hour with us. It is pretty clear to me, and I hope it is clear to everybody who's watching this transmission, that it is impossible to imagine healthy countries, a healthy region, without truly strengthening democracy, but not by doing the same thing that the US government has done in the past. I think that you all would agree that it is absolutely important to press very strongly the reset button and not only change the approach, but also change who you work with. Because if you want to see new results, but apply the same policies and play with the same players, clearly you're not going to see anything new coming out of this. I mean, that's actually a symptom of craziness, to do the same thing all over again and expect a different result. And clearly, our goal with this series is to highlight voices like yours so that people in the US, not only the Biden administration, but also people influencing the Biden administration, to know who to go to. And there have been questions here that we did not get to answer, but I believe it is absolutely important to continue this conversation. Let me ask one of my colleagues to actually put on the screen the event that we are hosting next Thursday. It's an event that is going to be very focused on social development, issues like education, housing, healthcare, to mention a few, without which, you cannot possibly speak of a reality in a country from where people do not want to flee. And so building minimum standards when it comes to social development, social policies is crucial. And I like to invite everybody here, not only to attend, but to pass the word about these events. Because again, it is not the common thing to do, to ask people in the region about what is best for the region and how can we really get deep and detailed on tackling root causes of migration, which, as some of you said, it's only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, migration only addresses one dimension of what's wrong and needs to change. So with that, let me bring this session to an end, not without thanking again Natalia, Marco, and Joaquín for your generosity in giving us your time and your wisdom. And we surely hope to continue collaborating with you in finding solutions for our countries, not only to stop migration, but finding solutions so that our countries can truly become places from where nobody wants to live, but places where people want to stay. I think that that's a goal above and beyond questions of migration. So thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, and we will be in touch. And thank you, all of you, for attending this session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.